Yo, yo, yo. Welcome in, golf addicts. Your boy at Tour Picks here on behalf of the Tour Junkies, here to cover another live event. Exciting stuff last week. We'll get into that in just a second, but I'm here to provide a preview for the course this week at LIV Bedminster, which is the Trump course in Bedminster. We saw this event last year. So a unique one where we have actually a little bit of course knowledge and history in terms of the setup, in terms of what we think is required to have some success at this type of a layout in this particular golf course. But first, before we get into this week, let's talk about it. 58. One of the most impressive things that I've seen in quite a long time. I did watch the majority of the coverage. I actually enjoyed the fact that it came on a little bit early due to the rain and the forecast in the afternoon, which we saw obviously him completing the circuit on that 58 toward the end there, was playing in a good bit of rain. But I've heard some people this week taking shots at the course setup and the strokes gain numbers and some of the viability of how to correlate this with some of the great rounds that we've seen in the history of golf. And I don't think it needs to be necessarily be compared. We should just enjoy it for what it was. It was a 58 and a 61 on the weekend for a total of 119 strokes. Like Sergio mentioned it in his presser, one of the most impressive things is it's hard to back up a really, really low round. 61, 9 under par the day before is an incredibly low round. And to go out with that sort of happening on Saturday and then better that by 3 strokes on Sunday is ungodly. It's virtually unexplainably good. And also the other sort of hidden element is, when did it happen and how did it happen, right? This is in the midst of contention in the final pairing on the final day. Something that the majority of the 59s that I can remember seeing in the really, really low rounds in terms of a PGA Tour standard were early in the week. They didn't come on a Sunday. They certainly didn't come in the final group, and they didn't come to win a golf tournament. So congrats to the backers who were able to select Bryson last week. Man, I feel like I was really circling around it. Those who caught the preview last week, I talked a lot about guys who are trending in the right direction. I talked a lot about the nature of the course to lend itself to bombers, with the fairways not really narrowing at the further that you go down and being super wide and resorty at around the sort of 300-yard mark. He was able to take advantage of that. I was not aware of the new driver in the bag situation until the event had started. I still am somewhat confused on how conforming it is, if he would be able to use this in a US Open, if he would be able to use this in a typical PGA Tour tournament. That's kind of the unknown for me a little bit, but obviously he had it checked out. According to was Anirban Lahiri on either Tuesday or Wednesday, he watched him literally take the wrapper off this driver, unbox it, rip off the wrapper, go out there and shoot and get around in 119 shots on the weekend is pretty unbelievable. And how he did it too, like, I was very impressed. It was not a lot of 25-foot putts. It was a lot of 8-foot putts. He was really, really sharp and dialed in with his numbers in terms of his approach game, in terms of his wedge game. Obviously, with the course only being a little over 7,200 yards and how far he hits it, he's basically got some sort of 3/4 9-iron or wedge into nearly every green. But he controlled that perfectly, and he's shown the ability throughout his career that when he has that wedge game to pair with a driver that he can keep on the planet in terms of the fairways, he's going to be one of the better players on the tour. Good on you if you had it. Just missed it last week. Let's shift gears to what we have in store this week at Trump Bedminster. Right off the bat, these two things are not the same. It's going to be very different than what we saw at Greenbrier, although I don't want to completely ignore the guys who played well. I'll touch on that a little bit more later. But what we have this week is a 7,524-yard par 71 golf course. None of the elevation and the mountainous type of environment and agronomy that we saw last week at Greenbrier. It's a Tom Fazio course. There are actually two 18-hole courses at this sort of uber private estate where, Donald Trump's daughter was married there. He's rumored to have a grave site on property where he will eventually be buried. Some of the the more prominent businessmen in the New York and New Jersey areas are members of the club. It's like a $500,000 initiation fee just to even be considered to join. And I think even if you're willing to pay it, that obviously has to go through a steep approval process from the current membership. The Donald Trump organization actually bought this property that went bankrupt. So he bought it from the bank in 2002 for roughly $35 million. Given what it is now, that seems like an absolute steal. I see it have some knowledge of what golf courses are being built and sold for down here in Florida in 2023, and 35 million is a steal of a price for what has been ranked a top 100 course in the US multiple times. Um, it seems like, there have been a lot of high priority access rounds and where this place has been showcased over a few years. We've seen some of the ladies tour come here, obviously the live event last year. I mentioned that it's been inside the top 100 rankings in terms of United States golf courses by both Golf Digest and Golf Magazine. I'm not sure if that's active up to date or just throughout the past, but it's definitely something they are not shy about touting on their website. The big thing is you're not going to see the same scoring. This course is a beast, super lush and thick rough that is much more penal in terms of how it affects misses than what we saw in West Virginia. Here's a quote from Bryson at his presser earlier today. This is a different golf course. This is a beast of a golf course. This is a major championship type venue. And I feel like the way the golf course is set up in regards to the rough and the tightness of the fairways, it's major worthy. Big statement from Bryson, tells you kind of everything you need to know about the setup and how this place is sort of expected to play. Let's talk. I wanted to touch real briefly before we get off of Bryson on the Ryder Cup stuff. I think he should be in consideration. I think the next month will tell us a lot. I'm not sure when the final selections are due, but depending on how he plays here, this will be his last event until end of September, I think is the next live event in Chicago. I want to see him play well again. I think he's deserving of it. He talked about a little bit today. Like, I hope that Brooks is in on the team. There is a chance that he is pushed out of the automatic qualifying top 6 positions based on points that players are likely to accrue. From when I looked at the latest standings during the FedEx Cup playoffs, they're going to earn a lot of points from there. He could be pushed out. Zach Johnson had made some comments early in the year that he wasn't going to consider the live guys. Wasn't even paying attention to it. I think that's changed. I hope that's changed. I think with the entire merger, everyone is a little bit more open to the idea of, once again, players from both tours being able to compete in similar events. And like, ultimately, I think he doesn't want to take live players, but I also think he doesn't want to lose. And I think Bryson, when he's in really good form like he is now, is inarguably probably a top 15 player in the world when he's playing great. I think Brooks is probably a top 6 player in the world when he's playing great. So to leave those two guys potentially off the team for like an out of form Tony Finau and a flyer on, say, Keegan Bradley, would be wrong in my opinion, and would diminish some of the likelihood of a United States win on what is appearing to be a very, from a betting perspective, all the money is coming in on Europe, and it's understandable. I think top 6 versus 6 is pretty close. It's going to be those next 6 guys that ultimately make the difference, and course set up, and he needs to stack as many good captain's picks as is possible. Here's what Bryson said actually today. I thought was pretty cool about the Ryder Cup. Quote, "Look, I played in a couple Ryder Cups and I would love to represent my country. There's no doubt about that. I feel like I'm in a good place right now to be able to do that. I feel like I'm a top 10 player for sure right now with the game I'm playing. And if I do get picked, it's fantastic. If I don't, I'll still be watching on TV and rooting for Team USA because I respect and appreciate those players that are on the team representing our country more than just being a PGA Tour or live thing." Very cool comment from Bryson there, how he will have rooting interests, how he will be watching and cheering on Team USA, whether he's selected properly or not. Back to the course this week, back to Bedminster. Important stats that I'm sort of looking at, and as you guys know who followed me on the show, gleaning data and strokes gained and the amount of access points to data that we have on the Live Tour are extremely limited in terms of what we're used to for model building on the PGA Tour, where you can sort by the last 4 to 400 rounds. You can isolate stats based on different filters. The abundance of categories that they have for statistical data is immense, and Live sort of has four things, right? They have birdies, they have driving accuracy, driving distance, they have greens and regulation, and they've got a little bit of putting stats in there as well, although not coming in the form of strokes gained, coming in the form of like total putts, which for what it's worth. Um, that said, I think distance off the tee comes into play a little bit again this week. I do feel like some people who may take a quick look at handicapping this week will look at someone who won last year at this event, which was Henrik Stenson. Henrik Stenson, a player who is currently leading the Live Tour in the season in driving accuracy and is not known as a super long player, certainly with a driver off the tee, but is more of an accurate and get into position player. That said, I don't want to discount distance. And anytime that the rough is tough, especially in the Northeast, what we have seen, the fairways pinch a little bit from what we saw at Greenbrier. The rough is thick and nasty. Everyone ultimately ends up in it. And what we've seen in the past play out, particularly at places like Wingfoot or some, places along those lines, the Baltus Roll we just saw with the ladies, PGA that I believe was there. Distance is going to matter. If you're in the rough and everyone's in the rough, having a 9-iron in your hand versus having a 6-iron in your hand is immensely different. Even if you look past Stenson last year, the two guys tied for second place were Dustin Johnson and Matthew Wolf, two of the longest guys on the entire Live Tour, both last year and this year. There's 5 par 4s that are over 450 yards. 2 of them are actually over 500 yards. So distance, it always helps, right? Par 5 scoring is the other one. So there are 3 par 5s being a par 71 this week, all reachable for the longer players for sure. They're all around 580 to 590 yards, very similar distance. So I think guys who can hit it 320 and have 250 left into the hole are going to have a big advantage versus some of the players who can't quite get it out there to 300 yards. Then the idea of them hitting a 3-wood 280, 290 to get to the hole becomes a much more difficult task. Now, it may take some of the trouble out of play, but ultimately another place where I think distance can come into play, and you have to score on the par 5s and make your birdies there. None of them are that difficult. They all should play under par. That's where you're going to score. Lastly, and I think the biggest thing for me this week in comparison to last week is iron play is going to be of heightened importance. The greens are well guarded by bunkers, and the rough, like I mentioned, is so thick and penal that it's going to be very tough to avoid bogeys if you are missing greens. If you look at last year and what was the most corollary stat to success that they have available, it was certainly greens in regulation. Henrik talked about it in his presser earlier today as well, that it's a lot of aiming for the center of the greens. It's aiming to conservative spots, but putting a priority on hitting the green. He ranked second in the field last year in terms of greens in regulation at this event. And all 4 players that finished in the top 4 were 10th or better in the week in greens and reg. You got to be able to hit them. You're playing out of the rough here. You're playing out of the bunkers. You're trying to get up and down. You're trying to scramble. You're not going to win. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to find a winner. In terms of greens and regulation, here's some year-to-date greens and reg leaders on the Live Tour. Mito Pereira is number 1. He's been playing well. He's been lingering. He was lingering again last week, I believe in that final pairing, if not one group back, but right around the top of the leaderboard. And he hasn't broken through. He hasn't quite been there late on a Sunday. Even though if you look at the records, you'll see some good performances from him. He hasn't really felt like he was going to win one yet. That said, he's leading in greens and reg, and he's been crushing it with his iron play nearly all season. It does feel like he's on the precipice of breaking through. And I would say the odds makers and the handicappers are both quick to understand that, and they have priced him accordingly low. Like, it's a tough number to stomach for Mito Pereira, a guy who hasn't really won anything. Um, you're going to pay that type sort of premium price because of his iron play. Second in greens and reg on the season is Brooks Koepka, then Sebastian Munoz, Paul Casey, which I was very surprised to see. I don't know if I've seen him like even shown on the live coverage, and I've watched quite a bit. He has totally disappeared off the map, but he is fourth on the season. Brendan Steele, Sergio Garcia, and Dustin Johnson round out the top leaders in greens and reg. And here's who was doing it last week. Harold Varner III, number one in greens and reg at Greenbrier. Charles Howell. Paul Casey, third last week at Greenbrier in greens and reg. Like, I don't know. Maybe. Carlos Ortiz, who also finished really well here. I believe he finished fourth at Bedminster. Dean Burmeister, I didn't want to say Bedminster again. Dean Burmeister was fifth, and then Mito right behind him. I wanted to make sure I included him because it wasn't like he had obviously a bad week. Moving to the odds board. Let's bring it in here. Let me see if I can get a good. Okay, this one works. Your favorite this week, and LIV is sort of like notorious for this at this point. You win, and you're 8-1. It's what happened to Brooks. It's what happened to DJ. It's what happened to Cameron Smith. It's what happened to Bryson now. So he's 750 over at FanDuel, 8-1 over at BetMGM. I believe Circa has like plus 725 on Bryson. He's the favorite. We know when he gets the form going, it's sort of deserving. Cameron Smith at 10-1, Brooks 13, DJ at 14, Gooch at 14, Mito at 16-1, and Patrick Reed at 16-1. It's pretty simplistic for myself, and it doesn't come down to a whole lot of numbers or a particular point of data that is steering me here. It's just the caliber of player. You take Dustin Johnson at 14-1. If you take him in every live event at 14-1, you're up substantially. He's knocked off 3 wins. He is the preeminent player, I believe, on the tour still. If you look at long term, he's got the most wins. He's got the best performances. He's put together the best numbers since they've been playing this 54-hole live golf format since inception. He's doing everything pretty well. Now, at the majors this year, I thought the performances were good, but he slipped. He had a wipeout a la his slip at the Masters a few years back at every one of them where he'll like triple a hole. He took a quad at LACC and still finished top 10. But I think if you're able to look past that, he's playing really good golf. And he notched a win earlier this season, right around this same price at Tulsa. I had him then. He has 3 on the live tour, like I mentioned, 14-16-1 on Dustin Johnson. Simply put, is go zone. Bet him every event at this number. You will be successful betting live, especially at a course where he finished second place last year. So he's got the form there this year incoming. We know the upside. We know the ceiling. It's getting to the point where it feels like live. And I talked to Ryan Baroff about it this week on Preferred Lines, which if you're here joining us on the Tour Junkies channel, would love and appreciate you to check that show out as well. That is a show hosted by myself at Preferred Lines. YouTube channel is there. Please give me a like and a subscribe. I would genuinely appreciate it. If you enjoy this content, I'm sure you would enjoy that show as well. But we talked a little bit about since this point last year where like Stenson and Schwartzel won, it's basically leveled out, and all the live events have been won by like the top 8 players on the live tour. Gooch has knocked off like 3 of them. DJ's won. Brooks has won a couple. Bryson's won. Cameron Smith's won a couple. Like, these are their preeminent players, and these are the guys who are winning events. Play DJ at 14-1. I still think he is equally as good as any of them, and these are good prices on a player of his caliber. The second one that I got, and moving just slightly down the odds board, I'm going back to Harold Varner. Was anxiously watching him last week as he was trying to make a run. He went up against a guy who shot 61 and 58 on the weekend. He was right there after the first round. I actually found a 22-1 on Harold Varner, which is at Circa Sports. Number's still available. I checked right before we recorded the show here, but his what he's did last week, I think, will be totally overlooked in terms of the accomplishment that he had because of Bryson. Finished fourth, whatever. He ran into a wagon. Harold Varner hit 51 of 54 greens in regulation last week. 51 of 54. He hit 17 of 18 greens every damn day. And he did it from the rough. He did it out of like a bush on the one hole. Like unreal performance. Actually finished sixth last week. Was first at a Trump course in DC about a month ago. So a nice comp there. Another Donald Trump owned golf resort facility a few hours south on I-95. Now we're up in New Jersey. He's gained strokes on the field in 10 of his last 11 professional starts, 9 of those on LIV, and Augusta National, he gained like 4.5 strokes. Finished T30. It was the only major he competed in this year. Harold Varner, 22-1, DJ 14-1. Those are my two picks. I think they're both top 8 players on the tour. That's why I'm heading to that sort of market. That's where I'm sticking the majority of my dollars. Now, notice I said majority of my dollars. I have one more pick. Here they have him listed at 34 and 35-1. He's 42-1 over at Circa. I've seen 45s. Streaky upside bet for me. A guy who was second here last year. A guy who was in the final pairing last week. He was standing right next to the guy when he made a 58, and there's just something a little bit demoralizing in that round where you're trying to chase and get a victory, and the guy's unconscious. I mentioned how there's basically 8 guys who can win. But if you want to take a longer shot, I want a guy with maximum ceiling. Like, I don't want a Cameron Tringale or a Jason Kokrak or one of these guys who will ceiling performance a top 5. I think Matt Wolff's ceiling is potentially a win. I think he's due, and he's had a few seconds now on the LIV Tour. And I just think that when he gets it right, he typically gets it really right. He did it throughout his career in college. He did it at the 3M Open out of the gates. He almost did it at US Open at Winged Foot on a course with similar agronomy, lush, thick rough. Driving distance was a factor. He's able to sort of wedge it and gouge it out of there better than anybody. I like the fact that he's a very, very streaky player. And he's hot right now. He's not a guy that you're going to need to bet all the time. There was a point there in the fall of the PGA Tour season, maybe 2 years ago. He was the best player on the PGA Tour, strokes gain wise through the fall. Totally fell off in January. So he goes through these ups and downs, both emotionally and physically with his actual golf game. I think we're catching him in a decent spot right now where he's a little bit motivated by maybe some of the stuff behind the scenes that's going on with him and his captain. But at the same token, he's playing good golf. He's putting together really good rounds. There was one really good round over in Europe, which was notable as well. 42-1, I think, is the other bet I'm taking outside of the 2 ones at the top. So just to recap, the 3 picks that I like this week for LIV Bedminster: Dustin Johnson, 14-1, Harold Varner, 22-1, Matthew Wolff, 42-1. Those are my guys. My name is Joe Idoni. At Tour Picks on Twitter is where you can find me. Appreciate you checking it out. Make sure that you hop in the Nut Hut with the Tour Junkies. They have a ton of great content coming out each and every week. It's loaded with information in the research center, from ownership projections, betting line movement, head-to-head matchups. My props and positional picks are all exclusively in there. Pat, DB's card. We have all kinds of insights from caddies and particular people that are on site at these different events. It is a super quality resource to have within your arsenal if you are putting any dollars down or playing any sort of fantasy golf. I highly recommend the Tour Junkies Nut Hut. It's like $20 a month, breaks out to like $4 a week. Best money you'll spend. Happy to do this show for you again. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Give this a like. Drop it a comment. I like reading those because Obviously, this at one point was a little bit of a controversial piece coming out with live content, and everyone is starting to come around on it. So I like to see that general consensus as people are starting to be more open to the format and the concept that it's really not going anywhere. You might as well have all the information at hand so that you can make a little money on the side with the live golf tour. At Tour Picks, appreciate you. I'm out of here. Hope that you all have a grand week. Good luck at LIV Bedminster. We'll see you at the next event here in about a month. Peace.